Hamlet is the story of the Prince of Denmark who loses his father, goes mad, and wants to avenge his father's death. Historically, critics have said that Hamlet is too dark and immoral of a story to be read by a Christian audience, but that hasn't stopped the audience from watching it. It is possibly the most watched and studied work of literature of all time. In the beginning of the play, Hamlet meets the ghost of his father, who tells him that he has been murdered by Claudius, Hamlet's uncle, who have also taken his mother as a wife after the murder. The ghost demands that Hamlet avenges his death by killing Claudius. Hamlet agrees. There is indeed something rotten in the state of Denmark. Hamlet spends the rest of the play either trying to kill Claudius, giving signals that he's about to kill him, or just the thought of it makes Hamlet plunge into despair and depression. Hamlet is a man who has given up and has decided to spend all his time and energy on pursuing a destructive course. He becomes completely intoxicated with the idea of revenge and leaves behind any kind of morality. But how are we supposed to understand Hamlet's situation? Should we believe everything that is being said, or is there something deeper going on here? Nietzsche said that the myth never finds an adequate objective correlative in the spoken word. In Hamlet, as in most of Shakespeare's plays, there is something going on beneath the surface which can only be understood after a careful examination. This is not a simple plot about a man who wants to kill his uncle because he is sad. Hamlet's sadness represents something much deeper than that. The death of his father can be seen as the death of God. Hamlet has stopped believing in everything, which is why he becomes the embodiment of chaos. Everything must burn. Everything he knew before his father's death is now irrelevant. Hamlet now only has one single goal in mind. Everything else must go. Hamlet's big mistake is that he believes violence can have a purging effect. Instead of trying to deal with the situation responsibly and rationally, he tries to wipe tragedy out of existence. Even though Hamlet is incredibly vengeful and guided by his hatred, he has a remarkable tendency to postpone the dreadful act of killing his uncle. It shows that he is not guided by emotions alone. He takes time to consider the deed, to weigh the pros and cons. He manages to create a system out of his thoughts, a philosophy of life which makes sense of his actions. He also looked up to his father and wants to do anything that would have pleased him. Ironically, he does the opposite. Some have pointed out that the ghost does not represent the wishes of Hamlet's real father. It is rather a diabolical spirit from the underworld who guides Hamlet. After all, Hamlet is a prince and should, more than anyone else, take care of his duties before he is crowned king. That is something which Laertes reminds him of. He himself is subject to his birth. He may not, as unvalued persons do, carve for himself, for on his choice depends the safety and the health of this whole state. The state of Denmark needs Hamlet to make good choices, to preserve order and stability, yet Hamlet does the opposite. He feels like the castle is a prison which he cannot escape. That is why he is so obsessed with the idea of freedom. It is part of his psychology. If only he can make his own choices, he will be able to escape his duties. Does that sound familiar? When Hamlet finally sneaks in to kill Claudius, he finds him on his knees, praying. Hamlet decides to not kill him at that moment, in fear of sending him to heaven. It would be better to kill him in his drunken sleep. The murder is postponed once again. Later, in an argument with his mother, Hamlet loses his temper and attacks the person hiding behind the curtain. Hamlet thought it was Claudius, but it turns out to be Polonius. Even though Hamlet has made a big mistake, he claims that her mother's marriage to his uncle was even worse and that Polonius was an intruding fool. But now everyone is turning against Hamlet. The tables have turned. Everyone wants revenge on him. King Claudius prepares a plan where Hamlet will fight against Laertes using dull fencing blades, but Laertes' sword will have a poisonous edge so that he can kill Hamlet. In the event that Hamlet will win the sword fight, the king will offer him a cup of wine, also filled with poison. However, not everything goes according to plan. Hamlet's mother drinks the poisonous cup by accident, and after Hamlet is hit with the poisoned blade, they exchange swords, so that Laertes is also hit with it. When Hamlet figures out that it was the king's fault, he also strikes him with his sword. Everyone dies, and the tragedy is complete. What happens on earth is reflected in the heavens. The entire play is based around something that happened with Hamlet's father. There was a perversion in heaven. Hamlet's dad here represents the father in heaven. The fact that his uncle has replaced his father and now sleeps with his mother is a perversion that Hamlet simply cannot tolerate. Hamlet wants to believe that something has been done to him. The fault is up in the heavens. The chaos started up there, and he is simply reacting to it. He is not in control of it. But what was it that happened with his father? Shakespeare is purposely not revealing too many facts regarding the murder of Hamlet's father. In a sense, it is a question we are all asking ourselves all the time. Shakespeare lets it be unanswered, because for most of us, it is unanswered. Are we simply reacting to events that were started by some evil being before we could do something about it? Or, on the other hand, have we been created by a good force who wants us to do good? Maybe Hamlet has mixed up the facts and not interpreted them correctly. In other words, could Hamlet's madness have been avoided if only he had a different theory about life itself, or the murder of his father? It seems that, despite all the head-scratching from the Christian critics, Hamlet has a morality to the audience after all. We are not supposed to sympathize with Hamlet, even though we may see some of ourselves in him. It is rather an exploration which shows how badly things can go when revenge becomes more important than anything else. The original story of Hamlet comes from Denmark right after the Viking Age, and one can clearly see that there is a stark contrast between Viking society, which was centered around the idea of revenge, and Christian society, which is centered around the idea of forgiveness. Violence does not have a purging effect, it just makes everything worse. That is one of the things Shakespeare tried to communicate when writing Hamlet.